Good afternoon, and welcome to today's class on the primary stage of formation. Laura, would you like to begin with a prayer, please?
Thank you. Yes, I would, Sue. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mother of divine grace,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, ladies, let's start. What we're going to do today is talk about stages of formation. We're going to talk about this stage of formation in particular, the primary stage, which is, kindergarten, first, second grade. We will review the books that we use in Mother of Divine Grace at these levels, and we will identify some ways to adjust curriculum, and I will just briefly mention some case studies. Okay, I'm going to start with an overview of the program. It's important, in my view, to have an overview of really anything that you are undertaking, because you need to see the beginning because you have to do it, but you need to see the end so that you can order yourself to that end. The beginning and end have to be seen in any endeavor to have a real understanding of the process and the goals. So education is always freeing. When you understand what you're trying to achieve and how that's being brought about, you can make the changes necessary when they are necessary. You can make decisions for yourself and your children. You are in control. And that's the goal here. We have a program, it's a pretty good program, and we have syllabi that are pretty detailed. And if you follow them, you're going to achieve goals. But your children are individual. And you want to understand what the goals are well enough so that you can adjust. You can slow this part down and speed that part up. You can determine that it'd be better to spend more time on, this material, developing the argument that's present in it. Now, I grant you that that's less likely to come up with kindergarten, first, and second grade. But you will find that I start every one of these modules with this same kind of conversation. And it's because we really want you to have the principles whereby you can make good judgments about your children's education. Now, this is a classical program. Classical education can be defined in various ways, and it can be defined with respect to the matter and the form, or it can be defined with respect to the end. This definition that I'm about to give has to do with the end that we're trying to achieve. Classical education is the cultivation of wisdom and virtue by nourishing the soul on truth, goodness, and beauty, so that, in Christ, the student is better able to know, glorify, and enjoy God. Isn't that lovely? So that's what we're trying to accomplish. Now, this involves various things. It involves habits of mind. Now, a habit of mind has to do with how you approach a subject. It has to do with, and I'll give you some examples, but it also has to do with an orientation of your mind. Are you inclined to think first, in terms of definition, or are you inclined first to react in terms of feeling, or are you inclined first to think about causality? Those are habits of mind. Even the reacting emotionally is, a habit that one could develop, right? How does this whole affect me? So developing habits of mind takes place over time. Now, the example I generally give is about, one time I was sitting down at the computer, and I know it's all operator error. Sue Solerzano was explaining that to me before, but as far as I know, I did not touch that keyboard. And the icons on my desktop all changed, and I thought that was really weird, and my mind went to, golly, is there a virus? What's going on? So I did what moms of my age do. I yelled for my son. I said, Richard! So he came in and I said, honey, I really don't think I touched this. And those icons all changed. I'm worried about it. Can you help me? He said, well, Mom, let me sit down there, okay? So I moved and he sat down. And then he starts clicking through, I don't know, trees. That may mean something to you. It didn't mean anything to me, but he starts clicking through stuff. I said, oh, so you know what's wrong? And he said, no, I have no idea. I said, well, then what are you doing? He said, I don't know what the problem is, but I know how to look for it. I know what to look for. Okay, he has a habit of mind, a habit of thought with regard to this subject, the computer, right? So that he knows how to approach this problem. Another example is James, my son James, teaches for us, and he was teaching Catholic doctrine class, and I was listening to his class, during the year. And I noticed that he always starts the class by recapping what they did before, and then kind of talking about the overview of what goal to accomplish for the day is, and then a reminder about the end to which he's moving. And I talked to James enough to know that that's just how he thinks. The reason he starts class that way is because that's how he approaches any subject. He has a habit of mind which moves him to always contextualize what he's thinking about, think about where it fits in what he already knows. That's a habit of mind. So you cultivate various habits of mind that are specific to classical education. And they are built into the program. So you're going to cultivate a habit of looking at a whole, of thinking of beginning, middle, and end, of paying attention to details. You're going to cultivate habits of noticing the premises and conclusion in an argument, even when they're kind of buried in other words. You're going to cultivate that habit. You're going to cultivate the habit of thinking about the end to which you want to go in anything you do, because you'll know that the end is the cause of causes. You're going to cultivate the habit of looking at things in terms of their causes. Those are all habits of mind. And so when we say we're teaching someone how to think, it's because they're developing a kind of method, and they have the tools that helps them think well. So those are goals of classical education as such, and it that means that the student knows how to approach a subject, that he knows, like my son Richard with the computer, he knows what are the first steps, what does he need to know first, how does he need to study this. He knows how to approach a subject. Now, it's also true that classical education it's about being formed in the truth, about having certain knowledge, right? And I always say to my students, think about this. Knowledge perfects us. It makes us more perfectly what we are meant to be, right? It utilizes a power of the soul, the power of knowing, and exercises that power in the way that it's meant to be exercised. So it's perfecting. It's like developing your muscles. When you develop your muscles well, you're perfecting them. Well, the perfection that we're achieving when we study well, the highest and noblest things, and when that's what you're doing, and then love follows on knowledge. When we do that, remembering that we're made in the image and likeness of God, what's happening is we're becoming more like God. Because, see if I can make that clearer, we're made in His image and likeness because we know and love. When we are actually knowing and loving, we're perfecting those powers that we're given because we're made in His image. So even more in his image, right? And when we're perfecting those powers of knowing and loving with respect to him as the object, then we are most like him. And that's the end of our lives, right? We want to see God face to face. We want to be as conformed to him as we can be. But it is also, so interestingly, the end of classical education. Classical education is ordered to knowing ultimately God, who is the first cause and the cause of all causes. So, classical education is actually preparing us for heaven. And it brings us as close to that as is possible in this life. It has the same end identically as the end of all men, the knowledge of the very highest object of truth, God himself. Now, there's another way to look at classical education, which is with respect to kind of the subjects that are included. If you look at your screen, you see we have the arts. We call them the liberal arts of the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium is grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and the quadrivium is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Those are arts. They're arts because they produce a product. All arts produce a product. Art is a habit of making, according to a true course of reasoning. So these arts produce a product in the one exercising the art. And their preparation for, Hugh of St. Victor says, their preparation for the lively mind to approach the sciences. The sciences are those things about which we can have universal and unchanging knowledge, things like the study of nature, Aristotle's physics, the study of ethics, the study of politics, the study of the soul, Aristotle's De Anima. Those are sciences. So the arts prepare us for the sciences. The sciences prepare us to think about what's underlying our knowledge. You know, what here now we know a certain number of things, but those are dependent on kind of universal notions, first beginnings, understanding how the mind works, what it first comes to, and what the causes of that are. So that leads us to metaphysics, which we also call natural theology. You couldn't do metaphysics or natural theology until you had done these other things. It's, you know, they are ends in themselves, but they're ordered to enabling you by your habits of thought and by the arguments that you know, by the formation of your mind, to think about the metaphysical realities and to think about the first cause. What do we know about, you know, that first cause? And Aristotle actually got to a lot. I mean, he knew that the first cause was a thought thinking itself. He says that. He knew that the first cause was both the end and the agent. He knew that it was, I mean, it's a thought, it was immaterial. He knew a lot of things, but not close to what we know, given that we have sacred theology. So the trivium, the quadrivium, the sciences, the metaphysics or natural theology is all ordered to enabling us to do sacred theology really well. And, you know, this is not just like my idea. St. Thomas, in his commentary on Boethius' De Trinitate, question 5, lays this out just in this order. Because your mind is, wants to know that first cause, and through revelation knows that first cause in a way you just can't in the natural order. So it's more satisfying. And what you're learning about is the highest and noblest object, God himself. So it's the most worthy, it's the most worth your effort. It's the pinnacle, the culmination of every ability you have cultivated with respect to study. Classical education is ordered to understanding sacred theology, which is to come to wisdom. So, That's what classical education is. And isn't that exciting? I think that is super exciting. I think it's amazing. Okay, now we're talking about kindergarten here today, right? Kindergarten, first, second grade. So of course we're not doing sacred theology yet. We're not doing any of these things, properly yet. But we are doing them. What I always say is we're doing all of these disciplines, but we're doing them as is appropriate to the student stage of formation. Now, to reflect on that, I think it's helpful to see that all learning is cyclical. We learn first on an introductory level, and then we come back to the same objects at a deeper level. And this is easiest to see, I think, in mathematics. And when one first masters counting, the very next step is to learn the 4 operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And then what you do is you use those 4 operations with increasingly difficult material, right? So first you use it with whole numbers, then you use those operations with fractions, then decimals, then percents, eventually in algebraic expressions, and you use them in trigonometric functions and in calculus, right? And in quantum physics. I mean, there's a way in which everything you do in the mathematical order is an unpacking or unfolding of this power that exists in those 4 operations. So you're clearly deepening your understanding of what's first learned on a very simple level. Now, this happens in every field, including the liberal arts and the sciences and natural theology and sacred theology. What young children do, if those of us who are directing them are knowledgeable about the ends of education, are exercises that prepare their hearts and minds for the deepest level of natural and finally supernatural knowledge. In the earliest years, one is helping the student strengthen and make docile his imagination by exercises in observation, memorization, and sequential ordering. You do this with a matter that also prepares the mind and heart for those later deep truths. At this level, this young level, the children make their acquaintance with salvation history. And that's something, of course, they will study all their lives. They are also introduced to the good and the beautiful in many areas as a preparation for the true as such later on. And Plato and the Republic has a really nice discussion of that, which I reference in my introduction to the Harp and Laurel Wreath. I just mentioned that in case you'd like to go look at it. The children learn the basis of all arithmetic. They develop an acquaintance with geometric figures. They're exposed to great music, and they study God's effects in nature, including in the heavens. Now, that's the beginning of the art of the trivium. They learn the basis of all language arts, reading and writing, which constitutes the beginning. I think I just said trivium. I meant quadrivium. The language arts exposure is a beginning of the trivium, which again is grammar, rhetoric, and logic. As the student matures, he continues to perfect these methods and subjects. He keeps coming back to them at a deeper level, developing his habits of thought. So, for example, in language arts preparation, one is clearly preparing for the trivium done in its fullness. So again, the trivium consists of the arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. It's worth noting that each of these has to do with speech in some way or another. Grammar is concerned with the construction of the sentence. Its principles are ways of signifying that determine the parts of speech. When you're, doing grammar as a speculative science, you're going to talk about what's material and what's formal in the sentence. You'll conclude that the verb is formal. It makes it be what it is. You are thinking about speech and how it functions. Logic concerns the common method of procedure in all the sciences and principally considers definition of reasoning. And, you can't do that unless you are using speech, right? Definition and reasoning are carried on through speech. Rhetoric is the art of speaking persuasively, so it obviously has to do with speech. So in all of these, there's a sort of making. Think about what you're making. In terms of grammar, you're making a statement or sentence. In terms of logic, you're making an argument. And in terms of rhetoric, you're making a speech. All of those have to do with words, with speaking, right? Now, you start out then building a foundation on which you are going to construct a knowledge that will actually lead to the arts done in their perfection, in their fullness. We're not doing that, kindergarten, first, and second grade. But we are working on perfecting the first connections with the arts that will lead to the sciences, that will lead to natural and sacred theology. Further, young students work on argumentation. Now, usually that's older than second grade, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, right? So that they can eventually use rhetoric, which we focus on in 10th through 12th grade, in the service of the truly noble. We teach our students to summarize, which is to order items according to importance instead of chronology. We teach them to identify an argument and then construct their own arguments. We teach them to develop their thoughts in paragraphs so that they can develop them later in essays and papers and speeches using the rhetorical modes. We explicitly, with our older children, introduce the ends of rhetoric into their regular assignments. Rhetoric is of three kinds: the political, the forensic, and the ceremonial. The political aims at establishing whether a course of action is expedient or inexpedient, like does it make sense or not, is it going to work? The forensic has to do with considering whether an action done was just or unjust, and the ceremonial has to do with considering whether someone deserves praise or blame. In our high school program, we discuss and write about all three types of actions and characters. And part of the reason for that is my experience. Students tells me that students in the rhetorical stage are interested in the high and noble, care about what is good and bad, and about what is blameworthy and praiseworthy. So the ends of rhetoric are by nature of interest to the high school student. That is my experience. And that's a very real participation in the art of rhetoric. We prepare for the sciences too. We introduce our children to great literature. Through these works, the student gains a kind of experience. The great works of literature appeal to the imagination and move the affections rightly. They present or imply profoundly important views of human life and reality as a whole. Similarly, the great works of history provide vicarious moral experience and a conception of human society, which means understanding our ordination to the common good, and an awareness of the greatest issues mankind faces. And all of this is going to prepare students to read, the more difficult works along those lines, such as what's found in Plato's dialogues, say in the Meno or the Gorgias, and then in the Ethics and Politics of Aristotle at the right time. We introduce our children to the arguments of our founding fathers regarding the nature of the republic and the particular incarnation of mixed government that we had in this land. And that's the beginning of the study of the politics. We have our children study natural science, particularly animal behavior, because that's the beginning of the study of the soul. So, we're leading them from the outside in. Since you can't look at the soul, you only learn about it by studying its effects. And we do that explicitly with our students in natural science. So for those of us who are aware of the fullness of the classical curriculum, what we're actually aiming for, there's an intentional ordering of our beginning curriculum, of our kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, all of that. There's an intentional ordering of the parts of that to this kind of fullness of classical education. And the idea is that by developing the right habits of thought today, little by little, piece by piece, right, the students will be better able to think well and to know what they need to know to apply to these later, more rigorous subjects, right, in college. Now, as regards the highest object of the classical curriculum, God himself, who is the end of natural and supernatural theology, we're preparing our children for that knowledge from the moment they are born. And we do that, first, right, by the way we live, by the example we give them of fatherhood and of sacrificial love, and by the doctrine we teach them as soon as they are able to reason. All of this is their first introduction to the greatest truths and to the object they will, with God's grace, contemplate in eternity, namely, He Himself, whom we will see face to face. We will know even as we are known. What an amazing end we have been created for. Now, I'm fond of saying this, but it's really true, right? Though all men think, thinking can be done well or badly, and one can be taught to do it well. In large measure, the role of the teacher of grade school and high school children is just this, teaching the children to think well. But to do that, you have to know how thinking takes place. And in virtually every module I put together, I go over this doctrine from the De Anima because I think it's so important for our teachers to understand what's going on as the students are coming to learn. Now, I'm summarizing what's in the De Anima, and it's a complex series of arguments. I'm not doing justice to it. But I think that it's important even to know the conclusions. So I'm going to do my best, imperfect though it might be. The first thing is that we receive the form of the thing outside, the thing that we're coming to know, through our proper senses. Right? And we actually receive the form of the thing. It's not a likeness of that form. It's that form, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't know that thing. So that form is received in one way into material things. So, the form of the glass, the thing that makes it be what it is received into the matter of the glass materially. It's received into my senses immaterially according to the sensitive reception. It's received into my mind in another way entirely. But I receive the immaterial form into my proper senses. I see it, taste it, touch it, smell it, feel it. And then that form is passed on from the proper sense to what Aristotle calls the common sense. And he calls it the common sense because it's a power that all the proper senses use. So think about it like this. I know that the thing on the table is sweet because my tongue can tell that it's sweet. And I know that it's white because my eyes can see that it's white. But my tongue can't tell that it's white and my eyes can't tell that it's sweet. And yet I do know that the same object is both white and sweet. That means that there's been an integration of the information from the proper senses. And that takes place in what Aristotle calls the common sense. Then, just as the proper senses receive from the external objects and the common senses receive from the proper senses, the imagination, or what we call the brain, receives this integrated form from the common sense. But the power of the imagination is different because it retains what it's received, unlike the proper senses or the common sense. And because the imagination retains the images, we can produce at will those same objects in our imagination. Aristotle compares this power of the imagination to a wax slate. The forms which come from the senses are like seals pressed into the wax. Sometimes the wax is too hard and the seal has to be pressed over and over and over again in order to make the image. That's when you have to tell your kid the same thing, 25 times, 100 times. One of my moms who had a special needs child said she read somewhere that sometimes you need to hear it 3,000 times. Most of us don't have to do that. But anyway, sometimes you have to press the seal, so to speak, into the wax over and over again. Sometimes the wax is too soft and the seal makes an impression the first time, but the wax sort of mushes and the image is gone. So, you receive the information. You're teaching something. The child seems to understand. The next day you bring it up again and he's like, I've never heard about that before. That would be, too soft an imagination. It didn't retain the image. Sometimes, however, the wax is just right, and then the image is nice and clear, as it were, sharp around the edges, a faithful image of the original. That's what you want. So anyway, this integrated object is passed on. It's received in the imagination, but then there's a power of the imagination called the vis cogitativa, or thinking power. So what the vis cogitativa does is sort those images that are received into like kinds. This doesn't require universal knowledge, but just deals with the particulars in front of them, just sorting them. So the analogy that I always use is the toy like we have on the screen. Babies use this toy, right? The baby picks up the star-shaped block and sees that it fits with the star-shaped hole and sticks it in. It's not, she or he is not making some universal, pronouncement about starness, or, thinking about exactly how these things are complementary. She's just seeing a likeness and sticks it in there because it's like it. That's what the vis cogitativa does. It sees likenesses and sorts those images so that like things are together in the imagination. And, Aristotle figured out that this had to be the case because of what happens next. But I did once see an article about an MRI where the electrical impulses were being tracked in the body, like from the proper senses along the nerves up to the base of the brain. And then, interestingly enough, those electrical impulses are sorted. So some of them go in the front right lobe, some go in the back left, like that. So there's a kind of, now we see a physical correlation, to what Aristotle knew had to be the case in order for the next step to happen. Now, the next step is this. These images, retained in the imagination and now sorted into like kinds, are used by what Aristotle calls the agent intellect, or the active power of the mind. What it does is, so to speak, shine a light on those images in the imagination and abstracts from them what is common, their nature, the essence of the thing. And then that is pressed into or received into the possible intellect. So like you have a variety of chairs. I have 3 chairs in this room. Okay, I see that there's a likeness among them. My vis cogitativa sorts the images of them so that they're in the same part of the imagination, because that's physical, right? It has a place. Then the agent intellect, that active power of the mind, shines its light on those images of the 3 different chairs and abstracts from them what's common, chairness. They don't look alike in other ways, but there's an essence, a nature that is common and I see. And then that nature or essence is received into the possible intellect. And that's how I know chairness. And that's how I come to know everything I know. That's when understanding takes place. So, given this process, starting from the proper senses and moving through to the understanding taking place in the possible intellect, it's clear that the condition of the image is of great importance in the effectiveness of the understanding. So even concepts concerning immaterial objects, Aristotle says, like things like truth and beauty, require an image, because this is how it works. This is how we come to learn. So when you consider even the highest objects, which are always immaterial, you use a sense image. So all this boils down to this. As educators, we need to be concerned about perfecting whatever we can of every part of the process of thinking. There's not a whole lot you can do about the proper senses. You can get glasses or hearing aids if you need to. There's not a whole lot you can do about the common sense. If you've got a problem in the integration of the common sense, you say it's sensory integration dysfunction. And there are some programs that you can use to help and ways to kind of retrain the common sense to pick out what is most important of the various sensory input it's receiving. But it's hard. There is, however, a great deal you can do about the receptivity of the imagination, where those images are received and then sorted. And because the images are the objects of the agent intellect, it really matters that they're there, that the imagination calls them forth when it's asked to, that they stay there so the imagination is strong. And all of that can be strengthened by the exercises that you do. So you will know that in kindergarten, first and second grade, that's what we're doing. We're working on strengthening the ability of the imagination to receive those images well. We're strengthening it and making it docile. And we do that by, in this stage, the primary and grammatical stages, which is what we're focusing on today, by working on foundational training, which involves memorizing, observing, and sequencing. You will see that every single assignment in kindergarten, really through 5th grade, certainly through 2nd grade, includes one or more of those exercises. And that's because we're working on training the imagination so that it's a ready tool to be used by the agent intellect. In the analytical stage, where kind of the focus is summarizing, analyzing, recognizing argument, we have the help of a trained imagination from all that memorizing, observing, and sequencing that we did, but we also we also are using it, right? You have to keep the images in the imagination to develop an argument, and that is both using it and it's strengthening it, both simultaneously. And then in the rhetorical stage, we're articulating those arguments eloquently, presenting polished positions coherently and accurately, and having a trained imagination is a great help in doing that, and then exercising it maintains it. So, okay. Now, none of this that's on the screen right now has to do with the content that we're using, but obviously they're used with a content, and there's an appropriate content for each level, which is what I was talking about with the beginnings of the various arts and sciences. So in a way, our main point here is to see that it's both what you do, which is ordination to the arts and sciences, and how you do it. So that's what we want to keep in mind. Okay. So as I said at the very beginning, one needs to see the beginning and the end to understand the process. We begin with laying the foundation of the tools of thinking, the training of the imagination, sequencing, memorization, and observation. Then we provide training in writing skills, thinking skills, and the mathematical progression. And I'll be talking about these things more. These skills are used with the specific content. Now, in our high school program, we're ordering them to 3 central arguments. The motives of credibility, which has to do with the argument that starts with, I can show by reason that God exists, and ends with, the Catholic Church is the true church. I want every kid who graduates from my program to be able to make that argument. We will also be looking at the virtue of a mixed government. So when we get to the high school program, we'll be talking about these in more detail. And in science, we're among all the other things, there's kind of an overarching concern with what is a substance? What makes something a one? And that's because it's absolutely crucial philosophical distinction. Okay, so now we're going to look more particularly at kindergarten. Okay, having that overview in mind. This is important for every stage of formation. What's on the screen here right now? There are 4 goals involved at every level of MODG assignments. Every assignment has these 4 goals. There's an immediate methodology, an immediate content, and then there's the later formation to which this method is ordered, and the later content to which this knowledge is ordered. The method at this level, kindergarten, is using observation, sequencing, and memorization. And as I said, those activities are found in every assignment. They're ordered to improving the power of making images and to the quality of the images made. And now you know why that matters. There are also specific content goals, which can be found in the MODG scope and sequence charts and in the MODG text used and reasons why charts. And you should have at least the text used and reasons why available to you on the family site. The importance of improving the strength and docility of the imagination just can't be overemphasized. The later formation to which this is ordered is the ability to order thoughts, both chronologically and by an order of importance, and to recognize an ordered argument, to produce or construct an argument, and to present a cohesive argument. The later knowledge to which the content is ordered is in many cases obvious. Learning to recognize numbers is the first building block for eventually doing calculus. Learning to read leads to being able to read Shakespeare and St. Thomas and Jane Austen. But there are 2 major content themes, actually 3, right, which I just laid out for you. And it's good to know what they are because it helps you kind of know what you want to emphasize earlier. Well, let's look a little more closely at kindergarten. First thing is, I think the first thing is kindergarten is fun. The entertainment value of children is underrated. Throughout the kindergarten year, we're working, as I've been saying, on strengthening the student's powers of observation and memory. And we do this by exercising his observational ability, his sequencing ability, and his memory skills. That's the methodology, right? In terms of content, we begin teaching phonics, reading, and writing. One very important choice you make at this level is which reading program to use. And what I say to you primarily is make sure it's phonics-based. Phonics-based materials allows your child to read much more difficult material at a younger age. And it also helps with spelling. My husband, was a teacher for 50 years. And he had this kind of little in-house study that he would conduct when he would run across somebody who couldn't spell. He would somehow over the course of the year, in talking to them, inquire about how they learned to read. And he said in all those years, he never found a bad speller who was taught using phonics. Now, there may have been good spellers who were taught using whole word. That's possible. His little study wouldn't tell you that. But he said over all those years, when he ran into a bad speller, and, he never just said, "You're a lousy speller, how come?" But he would just keep it in mind, and then when there was an opportunity, he would ask. And he said it never once turned out that anybody he talked to had been taught using phonics. And, so the whole language is just less effective, at least with respect to spelling. So in Mother of Divine Grace, we recommend teach your child to read in 100 easy lessons for kindergarten. This text has 4 short reading and writing lessons a week. It's very, very, very good about teaching letter blending. It gives children success right from the beginning and gets them to the point of reading something quickly. So the goal of the text is to learn to read at an easy reader level, and that level is usually achieved before you've reached the end of the book. I do want to mention, for those of you who are going to use this, with my children and a number of the families I have worked with, it all goes smoothly up to about lesson 50, and at lesson 50, there's a glitch. The kids find it hard, maybe they cry, and I found if you just back up 10 lessons and start moving forward again, the second time you come to lesson 50, it's not a problem. So just, keep that in mind. It is important to remember that exactly when you reach the easy reader level, this year or next year or the year after, is not going to make any difference in the long run. At this point, what you read to your child is much more formative than anything they're capable of reading for themselves. So I recommend that you make it a daily practice to read out loud to them. Pick stories of the saints, tales of noble people, and fairy tales, where there's a clear delineation between good and evil, the good guys and the bad guys. Fill the child's mind with people and events that are praiseworthy and noble. The new book lists, they're not so new anymore, but the book lists that we have in kindergarten, first, second, and I think third grade, and then they're kind of repeated in fourth, fifth, and sixth. Those book lists are for this purpose, is to make it easier for you to have good stories to read to your children, and then they can read those stories to themselves once they're really fluent readers. I developed those lists. So we have Saints' feast days, we have a list for the liturgical year, and we have just a list of good classic children's literature. I developed those lists once I started having grandchildren because, I wanted to make sure that they would have access to the same books I read to my children and that they read. The activity of listening to good literature is really formative. We live in a highly visual society. Children need to learn how to listen and make their own images. So being read to is very important. Once the child has heard a story, encourage him to retell that story. Then he's sequencing, right? He's putting things in a chronological order. This is before and that's after. This is the beginning, this is the middle, this is an end. You want him to retell the story in his own words. And, some children do have difficulty with narrating at first, but over time, as you persist, they get better at it. And in kindergarten, we have retelling with the Bible stories, which are in the religion syllabus. This is obviously also it's a composition exercise, right? The children retell the story, you write it down. They're learning how to express themselves in, complete and well-formed sentences. At least that's the goal. In kindergarten, you want to pay particular attention to sequencing. So retelling the story in the proper order is important. Now, children they won't tell the story the way you would tell it, and some things seem more important to them than to you. That's not a problem. It's their story. They can tell it their way. The only time you stop a child and correct him at this stage is if he gets it out of order, because it's the sequencing that you are most concerned about. The language of the stories read to the student there should be a variety. Some should be simpler and some should be harder. It's not bad for the language to stretch the child. Really simple sentences are all subject, verb, object. But you want your children to be able to listen to more complex patterns than that. We want him to develop an ear for various patterns of language. Now, we're going to work on that explicitly in fourth and fifth grade, but at this level, don't be afraid of something that stretches him a bit in this area. Now, in addition to storytelling, you're also going to practice memorization. Memorization is very formative because it trains the imagination to retain that information and retrieve it as needed. We want to fill the student's imagination with beautiful things. And we use poetry, just 5 minutes a day, but regularly, right, as one source for something beautiful that the student can store in his memory. And because he's hearing it, he will develop his own images to go with it. And that's another way of strengthening the imagination. The poems that are learned in kindergarten are about familiar activities and objects. That is, familiar to students. And so my goal was to utilize familiar things, something he could recognize and easily relate to in terms of matter of the poem, so that he could concentrate on the memorization and the pattern of the language. So he can, because it's familiar, he can more readily feel what the author is intending the reader to feel. Observing and talking about works of art is another source of beauty that we recommend in kindergarten. It's important to furnish our children's minds with the beautiful in every area. So the beautiful images that we have now, we're the Montmartre's Renoirs, or child-sized masterpieces, is what we have used and still recommend, but we're developing our own series of art books. We have that already today, the day I am speaking, for first grade, but kindergarten will be coming soon, and we're going to eventually have them for all the grades. It's too hard to get those Mommy's Renoir cards anymore, and I really think this is important for children. They need to have an awareness and appreciation of beautiful visual images, and it helps them understand the definition of the beautiful, and ultimately it helps them understand how the good, the true, and the beautiful are all aspects of one reality of being. And additionally, they're learning a bunch of poems, and eventually because they'll have many particular instances, they'll be able to categorize them. So that will be of service in the analytic stage. All our art assignments in kindergarten are ordered to observation and discrimination, which are very important qualities in all future academic skills. Sequencing is not as explicit in most of the art assignments, but the ordering of thoughts about the various pictures involves making a sequence, as does working on matching pictures or ordering pictures by other principles than time, like lightest to darkest. I invite you, as you're looking at your children's curriculum, you're looking at the first, kindergarten or first grade or second grade, to think about individual assignments. How are the methodological goals involved? How am I how is my child being asked to observe or memorize or sequence? Because those are the habits that we're trying to develop. And so being explicitly aware of them can help you know what to emphasize. Let's see. I wanted to mention that in math, in kindergarten, these days mostly people are using the Abeka kindergarten. But the goal, really only needs to be, well, originally our goal for kindergarten was that children would know the sequential order of numbers 1 to 100 and begin to work on addition and subtraction of one-digit numbers. Now that people are mostly using the Abeka, that happens by just following the sequence in the text. Okay, let's look at some of the specific texts. Now, I've been talking about the religion, how important it is to listen to that story, to learn how to listen well, and then to retell it in a sequence. I've talked about that. I do get a certain number of people every year who think that the Children's Bible is too hard. So I just want to say, if it's too hard, it's too hard, okay? And Father Lavassek's Bible is easier, less complex sentence structure. But I really encourage my moms to stick with this for a while. It's a beautifully written text, and if the child can do it, it develops his perception of patterns of beautiful language. My own experience is that though it stretches the student a bit, it's not outside the bounds of possibility. And by doing it now, he is better able to do more difficult things later. I already mentioned the Abeka Math. It's a good text. Sometimes people ask me, why did you start out with Abeka and then move to Saxon? Now, a number of our families use other materials, but most of our families, the majority, use the Abeka text for kindergarten, first, second, and third, and then they switch to Saxon. And I'll just tell you that the reason I did that was because they were the least teacher intensive. The early Saxon involves a lot of teacher-parent involvement, and yeah, the most of the other programs, which can be perfectly effective and are sometimes better for an individual student, but they involve more parent participation. And that's why I chose the Abeka. It seemed to work, and it didn't require as much of my time. And when you have a number of children, you're looking for something that can, that the student can use and learn from, but that doesn't require you sitting there all the time. Now in kindergarten, they're not spending that much time anyway. I used to use the Golden Step Ahead workbooks. You could use some workbooks if you wanted to. As I said, the kind of basic thing that you're looking for in math in kindergarten is learning the numbers, preferably 1 to 100, and then basic addition and subtraction using single digits. So there are workbooks that do that too. Okay, in language arts, we use 100 Easy Lessons. I've already talked about that. The handwriting program we use is called Writing Our Catholic Faith. It's a very nice program, and poetry is part of that, and I've already spoken about that. Let's see, I want to mention with art and music, so we have the kindergarten art book, which, as I said, has beautiful pictures. We recommend various craft kits, particularly from Illuminated Crafts, I think, Illuminated Art. The 36 traditional Roman Catholic hymns, which, and then Catholic chant. So what I want to mention about like the crafts kits is that in order to produce a craft well, you have to sequence. So it fits really well with our methodological goals. With the art book, we're looking at observation and memorization. The traditional Roman Catholic hymns, I think that it includes the kinds of songs that belong to our Catholic heritage. In the Second Vatican Council, I mentioned this in the chart, text use and reasons why, but Second Vatican Council and the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, it says that these hymns, particularly Gregorian chant, are a treasure of inestimable value, greater even than that of any other art. And in that 36 traditional Roman Catholic hymns, there's some Gregorian chant, about which the same council said, the Church recognizes Gregorian chant as being specially suited to the Roman liturgy. Therefore, other things being equal, it should be given pride of place in liturgical services. I just think that we all ought to be familiar with those pieces of music. And CatholicChant.com has a sung rendition of all the hymns, and it's just worth knowing. Okay, and then we do have the kindergarten science and social studies. Our kindergarten science book was developed in-house, and we developed it, and I love it. I think it is really an excellent book. It contains the kinds of experiments and activities that encourage observation and brings the children's attention to the world around them. It fits perfectly with our methodology. We haven't had a science program for years in our program, in Mother of Divine Grace, because I never found anything that did what I thought ought to be done. I would say to the moms, and it says in Designing Your Own Classical Curriculum, that children need to, plant beans and watch them grow. They need to take nature walks so that they can become acquainted with God's creation. Well, now we have a book that gives specific directed activities that actually, embody that. It has worksheets highlighting the seasons. It has nice simple science experiments. There are a couple pages about the formation of butterflies and frogs. And if it were me, I would get one of those butterfly kits and maybe capture a few tadpoles so that we could, actually see that take place. There's a discussion of the parts of the flowers. So, I go out on a nature walk and you come home with some flowers and then you compare it to the worksheets. Really nice. And then there are nature walk worksheets which can be used over and over. I really like this program, this text. The kindergarten social studies is really simple. It only has 21 pages, so roughly 1 page a week. Uses pretty photographs ordered to what I call a kind of iconography with respect to very basic U.S. symbols. So there's a page with a picture and paragraph about the U.S. flag. There's one about the Constitution, one about the White House and Congress, one about the Supreme Court. So, these are symbols or icons of our country, and we think having students acquainted with them is a good idea and would be really great if you could go to, Washington, D.C. and see them in person. There's also about 11 pages with pictures and a paragraph or two about well-known U.S. landmarks and early American settlements. So just as an example, we've got something about the Grand Canyon, something about the Great Lakes, something about Mount St. Helens, California redwood, and sequoia trees, like that. When my children were little, I would get out a map and I would point to where Grandpa and Grandma lived and where various siblings of mine were. And it was kind of a way of making the geography of our country more personal. And this is sort of a similar approach. It will help make the U.S. icons more known, which is good. And it will also be good preparation for states and capitals memorization. Here's, this is the state in which there's Niagara Falls. Here's where Mount Rushmore is, that kind of thing. So that's the idea. Okay. So now let's think a little bit about first grade. So first grade, is this still, we're talking about early childhood learning, and the focus in terms of content is still on acquiring basic skills of reading and writing. In doing that, we incorporate memorization, observation, and sequencing, and you know why. It's because we want to strengthen and train the imagination. We work on daily memorization with the St. Joseph's Baltimore Catechism, questions and answers, as well as in learning the prayers and in poetry. Memorization, remember, is important because it trains the imagination, strengthening it and making it docile so it can retrieve what it needs to when it's needed. And then it's also important to fill the imagination with beautiful and varied images. And that's, found beautiful language, as you find it in poetry, and beautiful music and beautiful artwork, and the stories of good and noble people, which are also beautiful. The poems that we concentrate on in this year are still those about familiar activities and objects in the student's experience so that he can, he's not struggling with recognizing what we're talking about. They're familiar, so he can concentrate on memorizing and, kind of feeling the flow of the language. Our main focus for first grade is narration. That is, being able to retell stories and events as a whole. In kindergarten, mostly the kids do, as a matter of fact, but it's not so much that. It's just whatever they pick to tell you about, let them tell you, but then you're focused on, is it the right order? Did that actually happen after that? In first grade, you're still doing that, but now you're really interested in having some kind of beginning, middle, and end, having a whole, okay? So you're concerned about the sequencing skills, things being retold in the right order, but you're also adding something to that. And it's one of the reasons why we use Aesop's fables and saint stories, because you practice the retelling of a story that does have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Aesop's fables is, There's a beginning, middle, and end to every one of those. And so you want to make sure that the children are incorporating all of all three, as it were, parts. And in order to do this, they have to learn to pay close attention, which is a habit, right? Um, and that strengthens their powers of observation because they have to listen attentively. So observing in that way. And then, as in first grade, we encourage you to write the story as you did in kindergarten, but then we encourage the children to copy. A lot of first graders can't copy the whole story, but they copy maybe the first line. They copy something, which encourages observation and hand-eye coordination. And as they did in kindergarten, they make an illustration or a drawing of what they are telling about, and that also encourages the imagination. The saint stories help students become familiar with the cloud of witnesses our church provides. They show the children what true nobility is and that it can be achieved. The new book lists that I was talking about, again, they're not so new anymore. But anyway, those book lists in the first grade syllabus can help with that. So the list of the saints' feast days and the list for the liturgical year are really helpful when you're focusing on various saints. The Baltimore Catechism, which I love, introduces the basic doctrines of the church, which are studied every year. I do want to point out one more thing. This act of narrating the story is an important part of learning how to write. It's actually a composition skill. It provides practice for the student in expressing himself, in complete thoughts. Let me see. Oh, and in art in first grade, we are, again, like in kindergarten, we want to furnish the children's mind with the beautiful in this area as well as others, and those visual images lay a foundation for future awareness and appreciation of other beautiful images. And as I said before, helps them think about what is beauty, why is something beautiful, and how is that related to the good and the true? Okay, so let's look at the actual text. Good. Okay, the St. Joseph's Catechism, I already said. I love it. The question and answer format is perfect for the students. They're good at memorizing. They feel very excited about the fact that they have mastery. It's just great. And then the Saints' books, are important for the reasons I've already given. I talked about the Abeka, Arithmetic 1. Same thing's true with that as with the kindergarten Abeka. It's not teacher intensive. You might, you have to explain to the student what he's doing. Some kids need you to sit down, but it doesn't take very long. Even in first grade, some children are able to, work on a line of math problems while you do something else. And it's possible with Abeka if it's possible for the child. In language arts, we're still using 100 Easy Lessons, which I talked about in the kindergarten. We use that Writing Our Catholic Faith for kindergarten, which is lovely, and I talked about poetry. Let's see, we talked first grade art. We have this beautiful book, beautiful images, good questions, really fun to use with the children. We talked about Aesop's Fables. Say the same thing about craft kits. They're good for the sequencing skills as well as being a lot of fun. Yeah, I guess the addition here from kindergarten is those classical music pieces. And I picked out just some pieces that my husband, particularly, who knew a lot about music, used to play for our kids. So when they were little, Peter and the Wolf, The Carnival of the Animals, Bach's Goldberg Variations, Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, the Farewell Symphony. Those are all very accessible. And I encourage the moms I work with to introduce classical music early when kids are open. We're surrounded with a culture that doesn't appreciate classical music and doesn't appreciate the beauty that's found in it. And our kids will, I'd like them to, and they will if they're exposed to it, especially early, because the beautiful is attractive. Um, it's also true that most of these particular pieces feature individual instruments, so it's possible to listen carefully and then help the children distinguish the sounds of the different instruments. So, it's part of that emphasis in first grade on distinction and discrimination in the right sense of, seeing that this is not that. Um, let's see. And then we have in first grade another lovely, lovely little science book. I highly recommend it. It has beautiful pictures about the seasons. It has nice, simple experiments that uses materials that we all have around the house. It has those same Nature Walk worksheets. And in addition, it has this lovely feature. There are 6 pages about important, famous, and Catholic scientists. St. Albert, St. Thomas Aquinas, Lavoisier, Mendel, Pasteur, and Jerome Lejeune, who is such a wonderful man. It's a beginning. We have among our consultants a really wonderful woman who has her doctorate in biology. And she said she's a convert to the faith. She said she grew up thinking that, there would be she didn't think there were any Catholic scientists. She didn't know about the Catholic background of some of these people, of course, whom she knew, she knew of. But she didn't know them as Catholic. She was taught that, the faith would be a hindrance, at least, And she said as a Catholic, she's just been amazed to discover that, in fact, most of the great discoveries and, pushes forward in science were accomplished by believers, and specifically by Catholic men, which makes sense because they already have an orientation to the true, and they have a valid framework within which they are working. So it's an aid to discovery. I want our children to know that from the beginning. Our Protestant brethren sometimes assert that there can be 2 truths, a truth of nature and a truth of faith, and that those might be in conflict. So you will see in Protestant science books, an admonition that should you encounter a truth of nature that is opposed to the truth of faith, you choose the truth of faith. But bottom line, that's crazy. That's a crazy position. There's only one author of truth, God, who creates both the natural and the supernatural order. There is no such thing as a truth that can be in conflict with another truth. And I think that that's really the reason most important scientists in history were and are Catholic. They know that. And this lovely little text provides a beginning in that understanding. So I really, really like it. The first grade map skills book is based on a long out-of-print text that I used with some of my kids. It's ordered to a broad overview of geographical information, like just a beginning and just very simple level. Starts with the names of the continents, the oceans, some basic information about North America. There's a map of the United States. There's a highlight on one state, and then a page allowing the student to find his own state and his state bird. There's a highlighted city, and then a page for the children to put the name of their city. Like that. Very basic beginning map skills would take you, 5 minutes on any given day, but it prepares the student for geographical and social studies that come later. So it's a nice addition, I would say, to our program. Okay, I think that's good. So let's now, our last grade to consider in this module is second grade. So we're still, it's still part of this kindergarten first, second grade grouping, right? We're still working on improving those basic skills of reading and writing. We'd really like to see the children be fluent readers, Fluent readers means that they learn the word by breaking it down into its parts, the phonics parts, right? The letter sounds, but now they recognize it. See, a whole word was like, let's skip that first part and just go straight to recognition. But it's been discovered that that just doesn't work very well. What we want is for the children to learn to read phonetically, but then develop a recognition vocabulary. And we're working on that in second grade. We continue to incorporate memorization, observation, and sequencing within all the lessons, just as we have in kindergarten and first grade, so that we can work on that strengthening and training of the imagination. We are specifically interested in the listening skills, which we develop in religion, history, and science. People develop the ability to listen well when they're read to consistently, so that they learn how to practice sustained listening. And you can tell, I used to coordinate the standardized tests for our homeschooling group, and for years there was a listening test in one of those groups. And you could look around the room and see who had been read to. I mean, if you've been read to and you have the habit of attentive listening, then that test is super simple. But if you're not used to listening, it's really hard. So it's a habit you want to develop. Being read to not only helps the student learn how to listen attentively, but it also helps developing those sequencing skills, which, as I've been saying, is the first kind of order. And you learn beginning, middle, and end before you learn an order of importance. But if you don't have that chronological order really down, seeing, that you've got a whole, what a whole is, what comes before what, if you don't get that down, you're going to have trouble with developing a whole out of an order of importance. Now, this skill is developed passively when one is being read to, but it's being developed actively when one is producing a narrative sequence, and we include both in the assignments or exercises in second grade. We're working on daily memorization practice with the Baltimore Catechism's questions and answers, and in poetry practice, memorization is important for all those reasons I've already talked about. You're training the imagination to retain and retrieve information. And we're continuing to fill the imagination with the beautiful, right? And there are, I'll just mention again, those book lists that are in the syllabus. The saint stories, which we use again in second grade, are a help, in introducing the children to their community. They are children of God. They belong to this cloud of witnesses. This is, in a very real way, their community. And by reading the saint stories to them, they're seeing what true nobility looks like. And they see that it can be achieved by, normal people. We're all called to be saints. So we want our children to be aware of that. Now, the primary new focus for second grade is copying, which is forming letters in a straight line with good, consistent shapes and sizes and spacing. This is a discipline for the imagination and the muscles. It strengthens the observation, encourages discrimination, and helps hand-eye coordination. Copying, when I was young, I thought copying was a waste of time, and I was so wrong. Copying is a form of imitation. Children learn generally by imitation, so it fits well with their natural mode of learning. And it has all of those other really good qualities. It strengthens observation, discrimination, and hand-eye coordination. I want to mention to you that in the online syllabi, in the resource section of the syllabi, there are various resources. That's where you find the book lists I was talking about. But there's also this nice chart. It's called a rating chart, rating skills. And I really think that it's helpful. It has 3 years at a shot on one side, so you can see like for second grade, it's kindergarten, first and second. So you can see what the primary focus was. On this one page, you can see what the primary focus was in writing for kindergarten, what it was in first grade, what it is in second grade. It tells you what should have been mastered, what you're looking forward to. If you look at the next page, it tells you what you're going to be focused on in third grade. I really encourage you to become familiar with that chart. I think it's very helpful. In second grade, there's retelling. There's retelling right through fifth grade. And we are, again, concerned about that having a beginning, middle, and end, and the proper sequential order. This year, we have copying practice using writing rote to reading or sound beginnings, whichever one the student is using, where the student copies the letters and learns the phonogram sounds in doing that. And then there's copying also in the religion assignment. So you can see we think copying is important. We have a little bit of dictation in primary language lessons. Dictation is worth thinking about too. It's a skill that employs accuracy in memory and is in that way comparable to narration. But it's also, it's a movement from what's heard to what's written, whereas when you read, you move from what's read to what's heard. And when you're retelling, you start with the reading and then you do the speaking. So dictation is an exercise that moves in a different direction than anything else. And in order to have mastery of anything, you've got to be able to utilize it in different modes. So it's important, I think, to do some narration. You think about it kind of like this. In the retelling, the students are making judgments about how to convey what's essential sequential information from the main source back to you in their version of the story. In dictation, they're also making judgments about their accuracy in writing down as nearly as possible the words that were spoken and using the right letters to do that. It's another side of the same thing, kind of. Also, the art assignments in second grade are all ordered to observation and discrimination for the reasons we've given before. And as I said, sequencing is not as explicit in most art assignments. It is when you make a craft, but not so much. But I encourage you, because sequencing is important, to just at least sometimes have the children work on ordering their art assignments, like I said, from lightest to darkest, or any kind of order. What do you like best and what do you like least? Put them in that order so that there's a kind of sequence, because we're working on sequencing. And then we will have things about matching, or which involves close observation. When the kids are retelling the fables, the sequence is explicit and really suited to the child's abilities. In religion, the narration is suited to the child because of his theological virtue of faith, whereby he understands what he otherwise would not, which is worth thinking about in itself. The fables are suited to him in his natural capacities, and the religion assignments are suited to him in his supernatural capacity. It's kind of cool. Okay, so let's look at the particular texts here. All right, let's see. Religion, the Baltimore Catechism #1 is like a step up from the Baltimore Catechism, First Communion Catechism, so that some of the questions are the same, but the answers are a little more explicit. It's just so well suited to the children. They can really achieve mastery of this. I've talked about Saints books and why and how already. In math, we usually recommend the Abeka Arithmetic 2. As I said, some people use the Saxon math. That's fine. I'm not sure if teaching textbooks is all the way down to the second grade arithmetic yet. I think it is. And some of our families use that. It's fine. Keep in mind with whatever math program you're using, those skills that we're trying to, improve, the observation, which involves discrimination, and then sequences of numbers. There's not a lot of retelling in math, but somebody can retell what they did. Anyway, keep those in mind. Method is a nice program for especially teaching the addition, math facts, so the kids get it down very quickly. We have it, we used it, I really like it. In language arts, what's in the syllabus is sound beginnings. Some of our moms go straight to writing, road to reading. That really only works well if you're very familiar with writing, road to reading, in my experience. Now we do offer a class on writing, road to reading, so if you want to undertake that, you can, and then you can just skip sound beginnings and go straight to writing, road to reading. But sound beginnings is a kind of scripted for a particular level use of writing, road to reading. It employs the same principles, but it's for a specific type. Where writing, road to reading, very powerful program. It can be used in many different situations. You can use it to teach reading. You can use it to work on spelling. You can use it to teach language structure. You can use it to remediate adults. It's a very rich program, but because of that, it's sometimes hard to use. Sound beginnings is easy to use, and it's one concretization of something that could be found in writing, road to reading. So mostly we use sound beginnings. Writing Our Catholic Faith is good text. I really like these handwriting books, and presumably the kids have been using the series previously, so it'll be familiar. In second grade, you can either choose to continue with manuscript or introduce cursive. There are 2 books, and you can just make that choice. I myself found that our cursive practice went a lot better if the kids were already at that point where they would make little curlicues just spontaneously. It was a sign that their fine motor skills were in place. The poetry, I'd say the same things I've said before. So let's see what's on the next page. Okay, yeah. The science with plants, yeah, there. And seasons and living things, nice little science text. Very much like the science text that we have developed for kindergarten and first grade. The text is investigative in character. It encourages learning about the world around one by observation and conversations. Nice book. History is very important. Our approach to history, which is, as far as I know, unique in the classical world, is to it uses the principle you start with what is most known. I found with my little children and most little children I've worked with that when I say, something is 30 years ago or 300 years ago or 3,000 years ago, it's like all the same. It's all just a long time ago. So I decided my kids needed to have a generational unit of time, and I did that by telling them our family history. So this is what it was like the day you were born, and talk about my experience when they were born, but also kind of, talk about some things that were familiar to them that I will then talk about in a contrasting way about when I was little, when I was born. So just as an example, I always say to my kids, our one telephone was in a central hall. It was plugged into the wall and it had a rotary dial, all of which is, like really foreign for these little kids. We didn't have a television at all when I was really little, and then we got a television and it was black and white. Nobody had a computer. That just wasn't, and the only computers that existed, the government had, and the computer filled up an entire room. We didn't wear seatbelts in cars. So that kind of thing, what's different, so that they can just develop some sense of within a lifetime this happens. And then we would talk about, what it was like when Grandpa and Grandma were little, emphasizing. And my father was born when there were no, there were like 2 cars in his town, the um, Ford A, I guess. And but then within his lifetime, everybody had a car. But talk about those kinds of differences. And then in my family, my great grandmother died when she was 106. So we actually knew her, and she was born just after the Civil War. So we would talk about what it was like for her. There was no indoor plumbing. You'd wake up in the middle of the night. It was cold. You'd use the bathroom. You had to go out to the outhouse, that kind of thing. Um, what the state of medicine and the changes. It's all intended to give them this generational sense as a unit of time. And then I would say something like, then we'd read Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House in the Big Woods, and then I'd say, as far back as Laura is from you is the beginning of our country from Laura, and then we'd read some of those Dolera books. So that's what's going on in the history. There's a similar intention in the geography. We do have, a coloring book of the United States, so, it's what's familiar, and it's been placed in a context by what they did in first grade. But we also start by making maps of the child's bedroom, maps of the child's house, maps of the child's house and yard, maps of the child's block, a map of the way to church. Because, again, I found that the kids didn't know what they were looking at. And so by starting with what was known and helping them, develop that first map of the bedroom, they began to understand what a map was. And that really helped. And then we're working on the states and capitals flashcards in second grade, which I really have found to be a good exercise for the children. It's strengthening and making docile their imagination. Let's see. And everything else here is familiar. So I think that takes us to, the end. Now, this little chart, what to do when it doesn't work. Especially with little children, so often you say, this just isn't working. But it turns out that the reason it's not working is not really because of the material, but because of something in the environment. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the room they're in. So it could be maybe the room they're in is too noisy, or maybe it's too bright, or maybe there's a television going too close to them. I mean, that is the environment. But I'm also thinking of things like, is the child getting enough sleep? Does he eat before he starts school? Have you paid attention to, when is his best period of focus? Probably you should do the hardest thing then. Like often kids have trouble with math. Do that when they're most able to focus. Think about things like that before you change the book. Because often the problem's not really the text, but rather somehow in the family environmental activity, Another thing you can do before you change the book is think about the formation goals that we've been discussing. Think about, what are we trying to accomplish by using this book? So that the children's Bible that I mentioned, because the language is a little harder, I will, get questions from moms about, don't you think we should try different text? And I say, well, remember that you're working on sequencing, and if he's having trouble telling back the story initially, partly it's just because he's developing a new habit, and it takes a while, okay? So rather than change out the book, why don't you try reading this book with this beautiful language that's actually a literary book? Stick with it, but give him 3 things that happen in the section you're reading and ask him which comes first, which comes second, and which comes third. Then you've broken down the formation goal of sequencing into something that's doable for him without giving up this exposure to this beautiful text. And then, say you try that and it's just not working. Then you might say, well, I really do think that it's good for children to be exposed to these different patterns of language. This really is beautiful language, and my own experience has been that if you persist, it gets better. But I see that it's not working to use this for the sequencing, and yet you need to sequence. So how about if we decide to try sequencing in some other area of the curriculum so that you're, so that you are giving him the opportunity to exercise that skill, but stick with the children's Bible, at least for a while. And let's see if, maybe he could tell about his science experiment and put that in order, but still listen to this. And then in a month, let's try it again, because, children's abilities change rapidly, and what he can't do today, he may well be able to do in 30 days. So I say that, and then sometimes mom gives it a shot, and she says, it really just isn't working. He doesn't understand this. It's just too hard for him, and, he's trying, and I'm trying, but it's not working. And we've, been sequencing elsewhere. So then I say, okay, so let's actually change that text. Let's just, we'll put that away. We'll take out something simpler, like the Father Levasic book, or maybe something entirely other. Maybe we'll just go to reading saint stories or something, and we'll keep this in mind for later on. So that's what you do. That's my advice anyway about what to do when it doesn't work. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, that first slide mentioned something about case studies, and we're not really doing case studies properly here. If you come to our question and answer time, we can go over those case studies, but I'll just mention that what I meant by that was, say you got a kindergartner and he seems really bright, but he's wiggly and he just can't remember the Bible story selection, and you're thinking it's because he just doesn't sit still. He'll draw the picture when you can get that far with the activity, but he's really not happy about it. He cries when you take out 100 easy lessons, but he's already older for his grade, so you don't think you should stop. That kind of thing. It's like, what do you do? And it generally involves kind of looking at the child as a whole. So, how is he doing with his poems and his prayers? Can he memorize them? Is he, how is his imagination working? Is he able to retain? And often we find that, oh yeah, he memorizes some things like television commercials really easily, but he just doesn't seem to be able to do the poems. Okay, well, let's work with that. I would say, I found that sometimes with children like that, letting them move while they're, it's funny, but it's true, letting them move or letting them draw while you're reading to them or move while you're talking to them helps them actually retain the information. Let's give that a shot. The thing about television commercials is that they're loud and noisy. So maybe with the poems, we want to aim for a particular type of poem, and maybe you want to act it out. Maybe that will help him. So that's the kind of thing that I had in mind when I said case studies, and where we'll really do that is in this, sort of question answer time that we're setting up. So ladies, thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate that, and I hope this is helpful. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Laura. And for the listening audience, if they are interested in the question and answer, you can contact the office, and they can help you sign up for that. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Sue.